Okay, so
Good.
do you think the action New Zealand government is currently taking on climate change is sufficient and does justice to our future generations? If not, what goals and actions would you push for the next term if elected?
Well, first of all, I don't think the government's approach to the emissions trading scheme is anywhere near adequate. We introduced an emissions trading scheme that was stronger than this one. The national government has watered it down, and we would reinstate agriculture into the emissions trading scheme earlier than the National Party has. So we would have it coming in from the beginning of 2013, which was our original goal. So all sectors, all gases, still important. The national government has kept that, but they have really delayed the entry of agriculture into the emissions trading scheme. And with our profile, that's got to be the biggest area that we need to make improvements on, because we know that nearly half of our greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture. So leaving them out, continuing to subsidise the pollution is not okay in our view, and we would change that.
Okay. In your opinion, the emissions trading scheme in its current form, is the emissions trading scheme in its current form an equitable system that delivers sufficient economic signals to emitters, and what changes would you advocate to make it more effective, if any?
It's not giving the right signals. We need to be clear with our greenhouse gas emitters, most notably agriculture, but others as well. We need to be really clear that they have to get their emissions down. It's no good simply saying, all right, let's have no increases from here. We've got to get them down, and we've got to wean ourselves off fossil fuels. In order to do that, unfortunately, the most compelling incentive is usually money. So we are suggesting a carbon tax of around $25 a tonne. So other schemes have, and prices of carbon have varied from $17 something to around $29 something. So we are pitching for $25 a tonne as a carbon tax, and we think that would provide a real incentive for people to invest in research and development, so that they're able to reduce their emissions and develop technologies that allow them to proceed without creating more, and that would provide a useful incentive, I think.
Okay, cool. What are your opinions on the expansion of fossil fuel industries such as coal and lignite mining and oil and gas exploration in New Zealand? Do you personally support the call for a 10-year moratorium on new coal and lignite developments?
We have to, as I said a moment ago, wean ourselves off fossil fuels. That's not going to happen overnight. That's going to take a while. And so we are very clear that that in the process of developing alternative technologies and having 90% of our electricity generation, for example, coming from renewable energies by 2015, then we do not see that new coal mines should be a priority. We think there is better. It's better if our investment goes into renewable energy sources. We have said that we would, if we became government on Saturday, that we would tell Solid Energy to stop work on the lignite plant in Southland. That seems to us to be a very retrograde step. It's dirty coal. It is even if you were to try to justify it in economic terms, it produces something between 10 and 40 jobs maximum. You know, there is no justification for going backwards like that. So we've said that we would put an end to the lignite development in Southland.
Mm-hmm.
As for a moratorium on new ones, I think the most controversial one at the moment is around Denniston, and we've said that that should go through the usual consent processes. It hasn't done that yet. It hasn't gone through its round of consent processes, and so all the information about that is not in yet.
Cool. What do you see as the main future sources of energy for electricity, transport and heating for New Zealand? Do you support the call for the government to create an action plan to attain 100% renewable energy before 2050?
100% renewable? I'd love to see that happen. I think we're certainly aiming for 90%, and I think our future lies in hydro, geothermal, wind, marine energy in particular, those four. We have those things in abundance. We could also add solar energy into there, and I think we need to be doing more, particularly in a place like Nelson. We need to be doing more to investigate how we might encourage photovoltaics and people contributing electricity to the national grid as they do in other countries. So those 5 areas really, none of them is coal, none of them is a fossil fuel. I think those are our future. That's where the research and development needs to go, and that's where our efforts and our reinvestment from our state-owned energy companies needs to go. So that's one of the reasons why we must not sell off our state assets. We need that dividend to reinvest in renewable energies.
Okay.
Did I answer everything in that question? I think there were other bits in the question that...
I think so. I mean, yeah, it was just the main sources for electricity, transport and heating.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
transport
I guess
and
transport's
heating.
different.
Well, I think transport is different, but we have said that we want to halve New Zealand's transport emissions by 2040. So that's per capita transport emissions by 2040. So we are very keen on promoting electric cars and doing what we can to move the population away from fossil fuels and onto electricity in particular. And I think the technology for that will only get better and better, and they will become cheaper and cheaper. So I'm looking forward to a time, hopefully by 2040, because that's when we want to halve our per capita transport emissions. When such vehicles will be much more accessible to New Zealanders. Insulation is the key to heating, and I think again there is a lot more that we can do in that area. We did a lot when we were in government, particularly in insulating state houses. We started at the bottom of the South Island and we worked our way up, and we nearly completed that job in cooperation with the Green Party, and that's been continued in the last year or so in a cooperative arrangement between the Greens and the National Party. But home heating, first, insulate. Second, look at cheaper ways of heating which are not environmentally harmful. So clean air is important, but so are reasonable electricity prices.
Does public transport have a role to play in the increase in efficiency in terms of energy use for transport?
Absolutely, absolutely. If we had in Nelson, for example, if we had a halfway decent public transport system, we could seriously reduce transport emissions. Just in this one city, in this one electorate, if we had park and rides, if we had some kind of regular and reliable public transport system, then we'd see a huge reduction in transport emissions. And I think that would be extremely useful. Once you get into the CBD in Nelson, it's easy enough to walk around. And it lends itself very, very easily to good planned public transport, in my view. It just hasn't happened here.
Okay. Do you think the government should be doing more to promote research, development and deployment of low carbon and more sustainable technologies and practices in New Zealand? If so, what?
Absolutely. We had a research and development tax credit. We introduced that in 2007 and it was just, 2008, and it was just starting to, we were just getting to the end of that tax year when we were booted out of office. The national-led government axed the research and development tax credit, which was a real mistake, I think, and business didn't really understand why the government would do that, and it just seemed like a mean-spirited exercise in political utu, which didn't serve the country at all well. So we would reinstate the research and development tax credit. We don't think we will be able to afford to do it at the rate that we had it at because of the fiscal and financial situation we find ourselves in. But we would bring it in at a rate of 12.5% rather than 15%, which is what we had it at previously.
Okay.
And that would allow businesses to invest and then write down 15% or 12.5% of that cost as against tax, so they'd get a tax rebate for that. Okay. And businesses were really interested in doing that, and we've got lots of innovative businesses, especially around here in Nelson, working on biofuels, all kinds of fuel alternatives. And at the same time, you know, whether it's algae or wood-based biofuels, what those companies need is a bit of a capital injection to put into research and development. So, to that end, we've also got a raft of policies, including the capital gains tax, which will assist in developing capital markets that those businesses can borrow from. So, a lot of our macro economic policies also serve this purpose of making capital available to business so that they can invest in R&D and especially invest in alternative fuels and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions.
So it's about, in the larger scope of things, making environmental research much more appealing to businesses to invest in.
I think that's absolutely essential, and I think businesses get it.
Yeah.
I think they generally get it. They just can't afford to do it, given the kind of policy settings they're working under at the moment. And I think if we can incentivise people to invest in more productive parts of the economy and not just in second properties, which are not especially productive, we can really assist those companies to go ahead. But it's also business win economically in the long run.
Okay. Economy, in the age of high and increasing oil prices, Do you support the reallocation of spending on new roads and public transport initiatives?
To both of those, while I think oil prices may fluctuate in the future, we are past the point of peak oil, and those countries on whom the West is largely dependent for oil, such as countries in the Middle East, for example, they know that their oil supplies will run out in the next 50 to 100 years, closer to 50 than 100. And so they themselves are having to look elsewhere and diversify their energy sources. And so in the United Arab Emirates, for example, they're focusing much more on solar energy, because when their oil runs out, as they know it will soon, where do they go? What have they got next? And they have a lot of sun and not a lot else. And so they are developing solar energy. And that's great. That's exactly right. That's fantastic. That's what they should be doing, and they would be able to be very, very self-sustaining and also export technologies in that area. But I think New Zealand is vulnerable, not only to you know, we export oil, and it is our third or fourth highest value export. And the kind of oil that we export is a particular kind that we, funnily enough, are not geared to refine in New Zealand. It's too difficult for us to refine here. So we're in the situation of exporting crude oil and importing a different kind of crude oil for refining here for our purposes. That dependence will go. You know, I just don't see that there is any long-term future in that kind of dependence at all. And so the way of the future will be in investing in new technologies and alternative fuel sources, alternative energy sources. Public transport will be critical in that, and I cannot believe that a government thinks it's more important to put $10.4 billion over 4 years into roads than it is to put into renewable energy or into early childhood education, for that matter. You know, it's okay to whip money out of early childhood education as long as Stephen Joyce continues to get mega billions for roads. It is such an antiquated and backward-looking policy. We should be investigating coastal shipping. We should be investigating alternative fuels. We should be reinvesting in rail. We should be doing anything but building more roads. I mean, that's just nuts and very short-sighted.
Okay. What actions, if any, would you take in your electorate to enable your community to increase their understanding of climate change and to reduce their emissions and dependence on oil?
I think the Environment Centre here in Nelson does a really good job across a whole range of fronts. They do a really good job in running programs for business, so for businesses to become more sustainable. They had a Code Red program that encouraged and gave businesses ideas on how to become more sustainable, right from recycling, you know, recycling and dealing with waste, through to big technological alternatives and propositions. But they've worked. The Environment Centre has worked so well across a number of these fronts. Enviro schools they've been heavily involved in. Now, the funding for both of these things, Code Red, Enviro schools, even the Environment Centres themselves, has been cut by the national government. And again, that is short-sighted. You know, instead of investing in people, we are investing in roads, and it's just completely counterintuitive. So what we've said we'd like to do is to have a whole network of environment centres like the one in Nelson around the country. But in Nelson, my job as an MP would be to support and endorse and promote what the Environment Centre is doing. They have a range of expertise there, whether it's waste management, whether it's alternative energy use, whether it's promoting solar possibilities, all sorts of things that they do can be taken up and championed by a local MP, and that's what I would do. But creating a network of centres like that around the country and restoring the Enviro Schools program are two of our priorities that we think need to be done nationwide. Certainly they need to be, the Enviro Schools program needs to be restored here in Nelson.
Alright. And the final question is, how can young New Zealanders convince the government to take stronger action on climate change?
I think civil action is really important. I think the fact that in Nelson 2,000 people turned up to protest against the possibility of mining on the conservation estate, in the protected areas of the conservation estate, was something that the government cannot ignore, and certainly the MP for Nelson, who is also the Minister for the Environment, cannot ignore. 2,000 people. Nelson hardly ever sees that size protest. It's very important that people take to the streets, that people get out and show politicians like me, show how much they support an issue, because we take notice. For all that Nick Smith got up and spouted the party line on environment, on mining, for example, to that meeting, he noticed. He would have been astonished, I think, at the number of people who turned up to protest on that issue. So never underestimate the power of public protest. People power is the thing that politicians take notice of. And I would encourage young and old to keep voicing their concerns about conservation, about climate change, about water, about our environment more generally, in regular and well-supported protests, particularly as developments occur. So if there is going to be oil and gas exploration in Tasman Bay, well, let's all get up in arms about that. Let's all take to the street about that. I think politicians, I know because I am one, we are very susceptible to public protest, and it is an indication for us, more than any poll, it's an indication for us that where public opinion lies. There are times when you lead public opinion as a politician, and there are times when you simply listen to it and you take notice. And I think there is a coalition of policies across a number of parties now where we want the same things for the environment. I mean, we've said we would not support damming the Mohikanui River, for example. We have said, you know, we want additional land to go into the conservation estate. We've said we must absolutely protect Schedule 4 land, and there will be no exploration on protected parts of the conservation estate. And those views are shared by the Greens, to a lesser extent by the Māori Party. I think they have a slightly different take, which are more to do with tangata whenua issues and but there is a lot of consonance between between those three parties anyway on issues around the environment. So I think a Labour Greens Māori Party coalition would be the best protection for the environment and the best way forward on climate change, because I think we are the parties that think most similarly about these things.